And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sri Lanka.
Mr. President, we were pleased to hear of the contents of the Secretary General's report. We were equally pleased to have with us Mr. Bruno Eduardo Rodrigues Parilla, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Cuba. Mr. President, thank you for giving me the floor. Sri Lanka voted in favor of the draft resolution, necessity of ending the economic, commercial, and financial embargo imposed by the United States of America against Cuba. Mr. President, it has been said on numerous times in this forum and elsewhere that we live in a world beset with multiple crises. Such crises should ideally bring out the best of us if we are to build back better. Isn't it time that we put history behind us and really commit ourselves to building back better? And that includes the Cuban crisis, Mr. President. It should ideally begin by promoting the means for populations to enjoy their full spectrum of human rights. The lifting of the economic embargo on Cuba, which is an anomaly in the multilateral system, will contribute in a substantial manner in enabling the Cuban people to face up to the contemporary challenges confronting all of us in this post-pandemic era. We commend the valiant people of Cuba, therefore, who have, despite the odds of an embargo against them, achieved an impressive degree of human development for itself, as shown in their social indicators. The embargo constitutes a violation, in our view, of Cuba's right to fully interact with the international community and thereby hampers the avenues for the Cuban people to fully enjoy their economic, social, and cultural rights, including the right to development. Mr. President, we call on those concerned to lift the imposition of unilateral coercive measures that are not authorized by relevant organs of the United Nations and are inconsistent with the principles of international law and the Charter of the United Nations. We were, however, pleased to have heard the distinguished representative of the United States who referred to the fact that there was greater accommodation in US policy in this day and age. And we hope that we would see greater accommodation in the times to come. Mr. President, the most problematic part of unilateral sanctions is in the practice of most frequently resorting to secondary sanctions aimed at universalizing the effects of a sanctions regime by seeking to avoid flouting of the unilateral sanctions by states and entities not bound by the sanctioning state law. In essence, such sanctions regimes aims at emulating collective sanctions. This makes it clear that unilateral sanctions can never achieve results similar to collective sanctions without exaggerated claims to jurisdictions. We must remember that sanctions, although a core foreign policy tool, has two important implications for the multilateral and unilateral activity. One country may well perceive the implications of sanctions differently from another. Another country may differ on the targets, the types, the directions. So if one looks at the bigger picture, Mr. President, carefully, unilateral sanctions have never had its desired effect. It is therefore time, we say, to re-examine the continuation of the sanctions against Cuba, which has been imposed for a long time. We will recall the time when superpower antagonisms left little space for consensus. Everyone did what they willed. They employed unilateral sanctions in the guise of countermeasures whenever there was a security need, while the Security Council lay silent. Examples are abound, including of Cuba, starting in the 1960s. We have come a long way since then, Mr. President, and Sri Lanka believes that it is time that these sanctions be withdrawn, as this August Assembly has a raft of other mechanisms to impose controls if the need arises. We cannot be seen to abdicate that right to the whims and fancies of any one member state, however powerful they may be. While reiterating our commitment to the promotion, preservation, and strengthening of multilateralism, my delegation would like to call for full respect to the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter, particularly those referring to sovereign equality, non-interference, and non-intervention, which we say are critical for the effective maintenance of international peace and security. Mr. President, we therefore call for adherence to the principles of impartiality, non-selectivity, and objectivity in the promotion and the protection of human rights, inclusive of the treatment of Cuba in the post-pandemic era. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Sri Lanka. And now I give the floor